Hi everyone, and welcome to The Wrap, simple news updates for busy people, brought to you by me, Verashni Pillay, and the Explained Akurza team. Now, if you're wondering why you're hearing my voice once again on your podcast, we've changed strategy slightly on the podcast following the results from our survey last week, as well as looking at some of the data that came out of your listening patterns to the audio that comes out every week. So, diving in, it's Father's Day. But being a present father is sadly a really rare phenomenon in South Africa. Over 60% of South African children grow up without their father, according to various data sources that we looked at. So today, Explain is celebrating the dads who are present, as well as the mothers, grandmothers, and others who stretch to fill the parenting gap. Now, what do we have for you in the wrap today? First up is our big story of the week, a turning point for justice in South Africa with the VBS arrests. Then we take a look at the usual COVID-19 news in South Africa, particularly about a breakthrough drug that South Africa is leading the way with. Then we look at some international briefs as usual, as well as some news from the world of showbiz, and then time for your big read. So let's dive in. Remember the great VBS looting scandal? In mid-2018, VBS Mutual Bank executives were accused of stealing funds meant for municipalities, stokvels, and the elderly in Limpopo. It was pretty disgusting stuff, you'll remember. Grannies queuing, trying to get their money and their deposits back. The big news is that the Hawks have finally arrested 8 people for their involvement in the Great Bank Heist, as it came to be known. The arrests include the bank's former CEO, CFO, chairperson, and a host of other really high-profile figures linked to the scandal. This includes those outside the bank, such as the KPMG partner who helped hide the trail and allegedly received kickbacks in return, proving that corruption in our country is depressingly as present in the corporate world as it is in government. A good thing to remember the next time we're standing around the braai gossiping. Now, this is a landmark moment for justice in South Africa post the state capture era and for our embattled National Prosecuting Authority, the NPA. The NPA has been battling to rebuild itself after previous presidents left the body hopelessly politicized and really fragmented. Now, they've put one of their top prosecutors on the job, so let's hope that this is a return to form for the NPA in putting those who have done wrong behind bars. So what are the consequences of this fallout for our political parties? Now, the ANC-led government in Limpopo are the ones who should feel the heat most. However, the EFF's alleged involvement is likely to affect that party more. Ongoing investigative journalism by Daily Maverick in particular has reported that money from VBS was channeled into the credit cards of EFF leader Julius Malema and his deputy Floyd Shivambu. Meanwhile, the Sunday Times' Chris Barron has grilled the ANC's party secretary in Limpopo, asking what the party is going to do about those who were implicated. The secretary has said that 7 mayors who were implicated had been removed but not expelled, and that disciplinary action will only follow if official investigations are conducted. We can't help but roll our eyes at that one. Thankfully, our justice system is catching up and overtaking some of the compromise processes that are happening inside political parties these days. On to COVID-19 in South Africa. You would remember that this past week, President Cyril Ramaphosa announced a few new changes to level 3 of the lockdown. So yes, we are still in lockdown, in case you were wondering. We're now under what government is calling advanced level 3. And in this level, the following is open. Restaurants, accredited accommodation except Airbnbs, business conferences, meeting places, theaters, cinemas, and casinos. Plus, in the most exciting news for me personally, you can finally get that haircut. We know it's been a minute since you sat in the barber's chair. However, parks, gyms, and public fitness centers are still a no-go, but some non-contact sports will be allowed. And no, there was no word on cigarettes. The president said dates will be announced soon, so hold off on making those bookings and appointments anytime soon. In terms of COVID-19 in South Africa, the numbers are still ticking up. Since the lockdown began, we've had some impressive testing numbers. South Africa has tested over 1.2 million people in total. 83,000 of those have tested positive, and more than 1,700 have lost their lives. So we are in the amplification stage of the virus. South Africa is now listed in the top 20 countries globally of confirmed active cases. However, we are also testing higher than many other countries that are probably worst hit. So how do we compare internationally? Our recovery rate is just over 54%. The world's average is just over 50%, so we're doing well. But it's our death rate that's truly spectacular. Our death rate is 2.03%. That's the number of people who catch the virus and then die. The world's rate is more than double that, at 5.23%. Has South Africa used the time it bought with a hard lockdown to adequately prepare for the peak of the virus here? We would have hoped so, but the Mail and Guardian has unfortunately reported this week that the worst hit provinces, which is the Western Cape, Eastern Cape, Gauteng, and KwaZulu-Natal, still need more staff, equipment, and facilities to cope with the expected flood of patients. The good news, however, is that a randomized trial conducted by Oxford scientists found that a widely used cheap steroid drug can dramatically reduce deaths in critically ill COVID-19 patients. The results came from the world's biggest clinical trial for COVID-19 treatment. And the good news is that we in South Africa have plenty of this drug, 300,000 vials at the last count, which happened on Friday evening, according to Health Minister Zweli Mkhize. He added that South Africa has 3 major suppliers of this drug in the country, one of which supplies it globally. As Mkhize put it, for us to be a manufacturer and supplier of a critical medicine, especially one that will prove to be life-saving in the current global context, is a real departure from the norms. He said that South Africans can take pride in being one of the countries that will provide a solution to a global crisis. We can't help but agree. Let's take a look at some of the global news happening right now. Reforms in the United States. We welcome the United States to the 21st century after its Supreme Court ruled that the 1964 Civil Rights Act makes it illegal to fire workers for being gay or transgender. We can't believe that that was still the case, but apparently it was in more than half of the country's federal states, which allowed such discrimination. The best part of the ruling, the 6-3 majority decision was written by a Donald Trump-appointed judge. A few days later, the court again ruled against Trump's interests regarding a famous immigration program reform. Trump, of course, took to Twitter with his thoughts and tweeted, "Do you get the impression that the Supreme Court doesn't like me?" This was just after the immigration decision was handed down. As New York Times columnist Frank Bruni puts it, "I merely get the impression that a majority of the justices are sane." Spicy. Staying in the US, police reforms are being mooted on the creations of a database to track police officers with a record of misconduct. We really welcome this. And this suggestion came from the conservative Republicans, who are the party in control of the Senate, which is a very rough equivalent to our National Assembly. They unveiled their own set of police reforms, which are less radical than those put forward by the more liberal Democrats, but still pretty promising. Moving on to Japan. While the rest of the world battles joblessness in the wake of the pandemic, Japan has barely registered a drop in employment, despite also feeling the economic impact. How? There's several factors, but the main one seems to be a corporate and country culture to prioritize employees' interest over those of shareholders. Companies are expected to focus on the sustainability of their business rather than just maximizing short-term growth. This is according to the chief economist at Goldman Sachs in Japan. He said, "During good times, companies accumulate profits on their balance sheets by restricting rises in workers' salary. During bad times, companies refrain from firing redundant workers by using retained earnings accumulated during good times so that people can have secure jobs." Now that sounds like a capitalist system that works to me, if only more countries would follow suit. Looking across the world at COVID-19, Brazil reported a record 35,000 new cases of COVID-19 in one single day. It's a pretty shocking number, but it's still probably an undercount. Their president is pretty much a COVID denialist and has endangered his entire country. Meanwhile, India is also recording tens of thousands of new infections each week. And while the rate of deaths in the US are starting to fall, new infections are spiking again. Anthony Fauci, the top US health official for infectious diseases, warned that the pandemic is far from over. People keep talking about a second wave, he said, but we're still in the first wave. Now, in other news, North Korea blew up an empty building that was the equivalent of South Korea's embassy in its territory, and with it, 2 years of peacemaking attempts. Quick background here. South Korea is the wealthier capitalist version of the two, while North Korea is stuck in some sort of hellish dictator, never-ending nightmare. The two nations are technically still at war since they haven't signed a peace agreement since the Korean War ended in 1953. So why the fireworks? It came on the back of a whole bunch of other aggressions, and it seems North Korea is trying to manufacture a fresh crisis with all these sort of attacks on South Korea. The North's stated reasons for this are kind of bizarre. They're upset that defectors, their own citizens who had fled the borders for the comforts and freedoms of the South, were lobbing balloons over the border. These held anti-regime leaflets and, wait for it, chocolate biscuits and flash drives full of Wikipedia pages, neither of which are available in the repressive communist country. As The Economist put it, as theatrics go, it was impeccable. Moving on to some other news in Mzansi, we are doing the things on the stage. Streaming giant Netflix has been doing the rounds for fresh stories from around the world, and 2 South African series has made the cut. You'd know about them. There was a spy thriller Queen Sono, and more recently teen mystery Blood and Water. Both are proudly South African edgy productions with some flaws, but overall a really high standard, and both have been picked up for second seasons. This is a testimony to our country's creativity and the rich stories we have to tell, which just resonate around the world. The great bit is that both series trended internationally with Netflix audiences around the world in various countries. Blood and Water even reached the #1 spot in the US at one point. If you've watched either of these series, you'd know that they're rich with South African references, lingo, and even indigenous languages. It's kind of amazing to think how it resonates globally. And now on some funny news that happened in Parliament this week. This is a friendly reminder to turn your camera off during virtual meetings, and more so if that meeting is with the entire country. An official accidentally showed himself half naked in bed while supposedly attending a virtual parliamentary committee meeting, while Minister of Public Works and Infrastructure Patricia de Lille was answering questions. The department released a statement apologizing for the incident, saying the official will face disciplinary action. Eek! It brings to mind a hilarious anecdote from a BBC Lockdown Diary Confessions feature that it ran recently. It goes like this. I flashed my naked boobs at my husband while he was on a video call, forgetting that he was sitting in front of a mirror. We can't stop laughing. Next up, oh shucks, where's Schuster? South Africa's top-grossing filmmaker and perennial favorite across the color line, Leon Schuster has seen 9 of his films pulled from Showmax, MultiChoice's digital streaming platform. These films all used blackface, including Mama Jack and Mr. Bones. Schuster was shocked by the decision, but he shouldn't have been. He's previously acknowledged that blackface is racist in a 2018 interview with the Sunday Times, saying he could no longer use it as a comedic device. But should he have ever used it? Well, we all know that our norms evolve for the better in society. Another network, HBO in the US, has hit upon an interesting solution on how to deal with films that no longer fit that norm. They have removed the American cinema classic Gone with the Wind for its rose-tinted view on slavery. Now they're bringing it back to the network, but with a newly added introduction by Black scholar Jacqueline Stewart, putting what the viewer is about to see in historical context and raising some of the problems with it. This is something that we could learn from in how we deal with our history, instead of just hiding it. Meanwhile, South African comedian Rob van Vuuren of Corné and Twakkie fame has apologized for appearing in one of Schuster's films in blackface. As far as apologies goes, it was a pretty good one, noting the excuses he made to himself and others and how it just wasn't good enough, particularly as a white father of an adopted black child. Finally, there is the big read. If you're looking for something really meaty to sink your teeth into, there's a beautiful read by Health Minister Dr. Zweli Mkhize with a poetic diary entry in the Sunday Times this week, recording a day in his life in the strange and difficult time. It's a must-read for a glimpse into how much work is going into keeping South Africans like you and me safe. It's behind a paywall for now, but will be made free to read later today. We've put a link below the podcast for you to read more. And now, in the week ahead, all eyes will be on Finance Minister Tito Mboweni as he presents his long-awaited revised budget speech to Parliament this week. The unprecedented nature of the pandemic has forced the government to relook its financials mid-year, something it doesn't ordinarily do. Mboweni has already warned that we'll be in a sovereign debt crisis as early as 2024 if spending patterns and policy do not change. Mboweni told parliamentarians on Thursday that the situation has radically changed and South Africa has to alter its priorities and allocate funds according to revenue, adding that the country needs to live within our means. In many ways, COVID-19 is a boon for Mboweni, who will now be able to wield the cutting scissors on the budget easier than he would have been able to before the crisis. On Wednesday, we'll also finally get to see the first quarter's unemployment figures. Results have been delayed thanks to the pandemic. That's it from us at The Wrap, a product of Explain.coza, simple news summaries for busy people. Remember to share the love, tell your friends to sign up for the update at explain.coza/subscribe. Till next week, goodbye from us.